Lake Ozark in Missouri is known as a family vacation spot. However, beyond the picturesque shores lies the Mark Twain National Forest, tens of kilometers of dense thickets, caves, and old oaks where people disappear every year. In June of 2019, the Carter family went here for a short vacation. Their trail broke off near a campsite, and the search continued in vain. Only 4 years later, after a summer storm, a tree uprooted by the roots revealed the secret that the forest had been hiding all along. June 2019, Saturday the 8th, 7 o'clock in the morning. A surveillance camera on the outskirts of the town of Osage Beach captures a dark blue Ford Explorer SUV pulling out of the garage of the Carter family's two-story house. At the wheel is Jack Carter, a 40-year-old history teacher at a local school. Next to him in the passenger seat is his wife, 37-year-old florist Eliza. In the back seat is their 9-year-old daughter Lily with a pink backpack decorated with a squirrel keychain. The neighbors will remember Jack joking over the fence that morning. "Finally, we're going to get a little break from the city." They looked happy and relaxed. The trunk was neatly packed with a tent, 2 sleeping bags, a gas burner, a box of food, a first aid kit, and several backpacks. The family was planning to spend the weekend in the Mark Twain National Forest on the shores of Lake Ozark, a popular but remote camping spot. At 09:42, they were recorded entering the Liberty Hill campground. Entry in the visitor log: Jack Carter, $38 for 2 days. Site: 14. The employee on duty that day would later tell investigators, "They were very polite. My daughter asked if there were any squirrels here, and we all laughed." The family spent the first hours outdoors as usual. They set up a tent, laid out folding chairs, and hung children's clothes on a rope. Witnesses, a couple from Kansas City who were staying at a nearby site, remember Lily running around the lawn with a small camera in her hands and taking pictures of insects. At lunchtime at 1:27 p.m., Eliza posted the last photo on the social network. The family in front of the lake, smiling, with their arms raised. This photo would later be shown in every newscast. Jack, who was fascinated by history, was going to take his daughter to the rocky outcroppings nearby that evening and tell her about the old Indian settlements. Eliza planned to pick wildflowers for new arrangements in her shop. It was a vacation atmosphere, an ordinary family idyll. At 19:04, Jack sent his brother Michael a short message. "The place is incredible. Lily has already found a squirrel friend. We're coming back Sunday night." That was the family's last contact with the outside world. The next day, several other campers noticed a strange detail. A little girl, Lily, was talking to an unknown elderly man in an old hunting jacket near the playground. He gave her a small carved wooden figure, according to the eyewitness, something like an owl or a dog, roughly carved with a knife. The parents were nearby and did not attach much importance to this. The man was described as gray-haired, with a thick beard, looking like a forester or a hermit. No one else saw him. At the time, nothing seemed to portend trouble. For most people, it was an ordinary summer trip. The sun, the smell of smoke from a campfire, the laughter of a child dissolving in the thicket of the Ozark forest. But these very days would become the starting point of one of the most eerie mysteries in the entire region. Sunday, June 9th, 2019. In the evening, around 21 o'clock, Michael Carter is waiting for a call from his brother. Jack promised to return home with his family, but the phone remains offline. At first, Michael thinks it's just a normal problem with communication in the mountains. At 10 in the evening, he dials the number again. No answer. By midnight, his anxiety turns to worry. Monday, June 10th, 7:30 in the morning. Michael calls the Camden County Sheriff's Department. His message is short. "My brother and his family have not returned from the weekend. Their car is not at home, and they are not in touch." At 8:45, the patrol heads to Liberty Hill Campground, where the Carters checked in 2 days ago. At 9:22, they find a Ford Explorer in the parking lot at the entrance. The car is locked. Inside, there is a bag of groceries, a few children's toys, and the car's documents. In the trunk, there is a folding table and some equipment. There are no signs of burglary or tampering. The policemen go to the site, number 14. The camp looks as if its owners had left for just a minute. The tent is unfolded, with blankets and clothes lying around. On the tourist table, there is a pot of pasta, 2 plastic plates, of which someone managed to eat only half. There are empty water bottles nearby. The impression is that the family interrupted dinner and did not return. At the same time, there are no backpacks, first aid kits, or family documents in the camp. At 10:45, the district authorities announce the start of a search operation. Rescuers with dogs join the search. The dogs pick up a fresh trail from the tent and lead the group deeper into the forest, to the east. But after 300 meters, the smell stops, as if it had been erased. In the afternoon, the Air Force is called in. At 14:05, a National Guard helicopter takes off. The pilots fly around the area within a 10-kilometer radius. From the air, they can see lawns, paths, and the lake's shoreline. However, dense oaks and ravines completely cover the land. There is no sign of the family. Tuesday, June 11th. More than 100 volunteers join the search. They check all the trails, abandoned huts, and coastal areas. A patrol on motorboats examines the lake. All results are negative. Wednesday, June 12th. The police make an interim report. No signs of a struggle were found at the campsite. The traces disappeared suddenly. Motive and circumstances are unknown. In the evening, at a briefing, the sheriff first calls the situation a disappearance under unexplained circumstances. Thursday and Friday, June 13th and 14th. The search is being intensified. 3 groups with dogs comb the thickets, and 2 helicopters inspect the area again. More than 30 square kilometers have been checked. Each time, the trail ends at the same place near the camp. Sunday, June 16th, exactly a week after the disappearance. The headquarters announces the end of the active phase. The volunteers are released, and the rescuers return to their bases. The Carter family is officially recognized as missing. For Michael and the rest of the family, the worst part begins, waiting without answers. The only thing left of his brother and his family is an SUV in the parking lot and a silent camp with a half-eaten dinner. Then there is only silence. The summer of 2019 ended without any results. All official search operations in the forest were wrapped up in mid-June, and only isolated raids by volunteers and relatives remained. The Carters' camp was documented, their tent and belongings were kept as evidence, and their Ford Explorer was parked in a police lot behind barbed wire. The silence around the case became more and more depressing with each passing week. In July, an interim forensic report was published. Versions were expected. An attack by a wild animal, a black bear or a cougar, seemed plausible only at first glance. But the experts immediately noted that the absence of traces of blood, shreds of tissue, or signs of a struggle made this scenario doubtful. The second option is an accident. The family could have gotten lost, wandered away from the camp, and fallen into a ravine or cave. However, searchers have checked kilometers of trails, combed dozens of gorges, and even used cameras to examine caves. No bodies or remnants of equipment were found. The third hypothesis was the intervention of an outsider. It sounded the most threatening, but it also rested only on the absence of other explanations. In August and September, the case was still discussed in local newspapers. The articles repeated the same thing. The family disappeared without a trace, and the investigation has no clues. Neighbors and colleagues at work described Jerk and Elisa as model parents, calm and balanced, with no conflicts or enemies. To the police, this only emphasized the absurdity of the disappearance. There was no motive to flee, no sign that anyone wanted to harm them. In the fall of 2019, the name of a local hermit began to come up in conversations. He was known to hunters and fishermen who went deep into the forest. The man's name was Amos Claybornne. He lived in an old hut a few kilometers from the campsites, alone, without electricity or communication. There were rumors that he chased away tourists, scared them by screaming, and even threw stones. However, some people considered him just a weirdo, while others considered him dangerous. On October 25th, detectives visited Claybornne. His cabin stood among oak and maple trees, old with a rotten porch and piles of firewood nearby. The report noted, "Behavior is withdrawn, answers are short. Visually, a loner, no signs of aggression were found." Inside, there were only old tools, long-term storage products, and books, mostly religious ones. Nothing that could be linked to the Carterites. Officially, there were no grounds for suspicion. Claybornne remained a stranger in the woods, nothing more. From the beginning of 2020, the active investigation was actually stopped. A dry formula appeared in the documents: disappearance under unexplained circumstances. Michael Carter, Jack's brother, tried for several months to get the search resumed, organized volunteer visits, and wrote letters to the media. But the response was getting weaker. 2020 was marked by new anxieties as the country talked about the pandemic, and old cases finally fell into the shadows. On the anniversary of his disappearance, there was only a short article in the local newspaper that repeated the same facts. In 2021, several groups of volunteers went to Mark Twain on their own. They used metal detectors, had maps of the caves, and tried to find at least some trace. But all in vain. The forest was silent. On March 17, 2022, the day came for the family that they had been putting off as long as they could. The Camden County Court officially declared Jack, Eliza, and Lily Carter dead. This decision was necessary for paperwork, insurance payments, and inheritance matters. But for Michael and Eliza's parents, it sounded like a symbolic verdict. Death without a funeral, without a grave, without an answer. 2023 passed in the same way. No new versions emerged. In the police archives, the case moved to the cold category. For the people of the Ozarks, it became another eerie legend about a forest that buries people without a trace. For relatives, it became a daily wound that time does not heal. Everyone knew the Carter case, but no one hoped for a solution. Only the forest silently kept its secret. August of 2023 was a hot and difficult month in the Ozarks. At the end of the month, a powerful storm swept through the region. Lightning, gale-force winds, and heavy rains that raised the level of rivers and streams. Overnight, dozens of trees were uprooted in the Mark Twain National Forest, and some trails and bridges were flooded. 2 days after the storm, a group of kayakers from Missouri decided to walk along the coastline to check if it was safe to go out on the water. There were 6 people, including 35-year-old paddling instructor Travis Lawson. They were taking a break near an old trail when one of the men noticed a giant oak tree that had been uprooted by the wind. The trunk had fallen on its side, and a dark niche had formed under it, intertwined with thick roots. At first, the attention was drawn to a bright spot among the earth and branches. When we got closer, we could see a piece of pink fabric. It stood out like a piece of a child's jacket. Travis immediately recalled the articles about the family that had disappeared 4 years earlier, because all the newspapers had a photo of little Lily Carter wearing a pink hooded jacket. The tourists rolled away a few clods of earth, and daylight entered the niche. What they saw was forever etched in their memory. Between the roots, as if trapped, were human skeletons. 3 different skeletons, 2 adults and a child. The roots had grown through the ribs, wrapped around the skulls, and held the bones so tightly that it seemed the tree itself was holding them in its arms. One of the tourists began to take out his phone with trembling hands. They took a few pictures and then immediately dialed 911. According to them, they were afraid to even stand next to him, lest they move anything. The Camden County Sheriff's Office was dispatched to the scene along with forensic experts. The area was immediately blocked off. Among the fragments of fabric, the experts saw another detail: a small wooden figure roughly carved with a knife. It was darkened by moisture, but still recognizable, a children's toy in the form of an owl. The journalists immediately recalled this object. In testimonies from 4 years ago, other campers said that Lily had received a similar figurine from a forester she had talked to at the site. In the evening of the same day, a team of experts worked at the site. Every centimeter around the oak tree was photographed and measured. The skeletons were left inside the roots until the morning to begin a thorough excavation in daylight. Journalists who had gathered near the forest transmitted the first reports. Human remains have been found, probably related to the Carter family case. Photos from the scene, an oak tree torn out of the ground, a gruesome trap made of roots, went viral on social media. For the police, this was the most high-profile event in recent years. The case, which had been lying dead in an archive closet, suddenly got a new direction. And along with the bones and a piece of cloth, an artifact appeared that brought back the first day of the disappearance. A small carved owl became a frightening confirmation that a random child's play was the key to the tragedy. The hardest part remained ahead, recovering the remains and finding out what really happened. On August 25, 2023, at 7 o'clock in the morning, a large team of experts returned to the site. An old oak tree, torn out of the ground by a storm, turned into a temporary field camp for forensic scientists. The area was fenced off with yellow tape, and patrols were set up to prevent any journalist or casual tourist from getting too close. The work began with recording every detail. For several hours in a row, every root and every clod of soil was photographed. Only then did the forensic experts carefully begin to clear the ground around the skeletons. The roots had grown so firmly that they seemed to have become part of the bones. To extract the remains, they had to cut and move the wood away centimeters at a time. By the evening, we managed to remove the first skeleton. It was a man. The bones were large, and the skull was well preserved. The next to be removed were the remains of a woman and then children's bones, which turned out to be the most fragile. Each fragment was packed separately in sterile bags, numbered, and sent to a special vehicle. A wooden owl figurine was also recorded and seized as material evidence. That evening, the remains were transported to the Jefferson City Medical Examiner's office. The work was assigned to the state's leading anthropologist. The autopsy and analysis lasted several days. First, the main thing was confirmed. The 3 skeletons belonged to 2 adults and a child. Their size and age matched the profiles of Jack, Eliza, and Lily Carter. Dentists were involved in the final identification. On August 28, the Carter Family Clinic's archives provided the dental x-rays. A few hours later, the match was officially confirmed. The people who had been missing for 4 years had been found. The marks on the man's skull were particularly distinctive. A deep dent was found in the left parietal part, characteristic of a blow from a blunt, heavy object, such as a hammer, stone, or wooden log. This injury was fatal. The remains of the woman and the child were so destroyed that a specific cause of death could not be determined. However, the general nature of the burial closely packed bodies, no personal belongings, suggested that they had been killed and buried in the same way. The results were announced publicly on August 30th. The press conference lasted only 15 minutes, but the atmosphere was heavy. The sheriff of Camden County stated, "We are dealing with a premeditated murder. There is no doubt about it. The Carter family was not killed by a wild animal or lost. They were killed and their bodies were hidden under the roots of an old oak tree. The investigation has been resumed." The news came as a double blow to the family. On the one hand, they finally received confirmation that the search was over, and there was no point in hoping for a miracle. On the other hand, they learned the cold and terrible truth. Someone's hand was behind the deaths of their loved ones. Headlines immediately appeared in the newspapers. Ozarks gave away their secret. An old oak tree became a family's grave. A random storm revealed a 4-year-old crime. Images of roots intertwined with bones went viral on the internet as a symbol of the case. And for investigators, it meant one thing: the Carter case needed to be re-investigated. Now it was no longer a disappearance without a trace, but a proven triple murder. On August 28, 2023, immediately after the announcement of the results of the examination, investigators filed a petition with the court to re-examine Amos Claybornne. The case file contained a record of the interview with him from June 2019. He was examined as a possible witness, but nothing suspicious was found. Now the situation has changed. A wooden figurine was found near the bodies, which matched the description of the campers who had seen an unknown elderly man in a hunting jacket give little Lila a similar toy. This match was enough for a Camden County judge to sign a search warrant. The search began at 9:30 in the morning. Investigators carefully documented every step, took photos of the items, and made an inventory of the seized items. Most of the findings were of a household nature: clothes, tools, old newspapers, and many religious books. But a cache was found under one of the floorboards. There was a notebook with a darkened cover wrapped in paper. Inside, there were notes in uneven handwriting, sometimes small, sometimes sweeping. Some of them looked fragmentary, as if the author was writing in a state of excitement or delirium. June 2019. A family with a girl. They make a lot of noise. They do not listen. Obsessive. She will take them into her home. Further, no date. Voices at night, not mine. They are here too. They want me to share. The earth will accept everyone. Last entry. Silence. They are with the earth. Old Oak knows. He keeps my secrets. We are not alone. Investigators noted that the recordings contain references that coincide with the dates of the Carter family's disappearance, but do not contain direct confessions. The phrase, "they are here too," has caused controversy. Whether it is a manifestation of mental disorder or a hint at other participants in the events. In addition to the notebook, several carved wooden figures of animals, owls, birds, deer, were seized. All were crudely made, with traces of the same chisel. Claybornne was interrogated the same day. He sat motionless, looking at one point. He remained silent to most of the questions. He said only once, "I love my forest. It speaks to me." The official conclusion of the protocol was cautious. The recordings show signs of mental disorder and are indirectly related to the circumstances of the Carter disappearance. Insufficient to bring charges, but requires further examination. Thus, a new piece of evidence appeared in the case, an old notebook. It could have been the ramblings of a lonely hermit, or it could have hidden traces of a conspiracy. But from now on, Amos Claybornne's name was once again in the spotlight. On August 30th, 2023, the day after the cabin was searched, Amos Claybornne was officially brought to the Camden County Sheriff's Department. Formally, he was treated as a person with important information. He was not arrested, but held in custody for questioning. The interrogation room was narrow and cold, the walls painted gray. The camera recorded every movement. On the table was a notebook wrapped in a transparent bag and several wooden figurines found during the search. The investigators wanted to see how he would react to them. During the first hours, Amos hardly spoke. He sat motionless, staring at one point. His answers were monosyllabic. Yes, no, I don't remember. When I showed him the notebook, he just smiled and said, "You wouldn't understand anyway." The detectives returned to the topic of the summer of 2019 several times. They asked him directly whether he had seen the Carter family or talked to them. Claybornne remained silent for a long time, and then suddenly began to speak in fragments. The girl was laughing. I carved an owl for her. She said she was keeping it as a lucky charm. Then there was silence again. The investigators asked what he meant in his notes by, "They are here too." Amos looked at the floor, moving his fingers across the table as if he were drawing something invisible. His answer was confused. "You think I'm alone, but the forest is not silent. There are others who listen to it. They want the same thing as he does. I heard their voices at night." When asked who these others were, he only repeated, "You won't find them. They are like roots. They are deep. They know where to hide." A psychiatrist present during the interrogation took notes. Speech is fragmented, signs of delirium. At the same time, the phrases may indicate real persons with whom Claybornne had contact. The detectives turned the conversation back to the Carter family. Amos sighed and said, "My dad was loud. He told me to stay away. They didn't understand. The forest doesn't like shouting. I saw him fall. I did not touch it. The earth took him." This confession sounded like a hint of a fight, but there was no evidence. The report noted, "The testimony is contradictory. The suspect describes the events, but avoids specifics." When he was shown the photos from the scene under the oak tree, he reacted unexpectedly calmly. It was meant to be. The old oak tree keeps everything. It hides. It protects. They are with him. They don't make any more noise. At the end of the hours-long interrogation, he repeated the same thing. "I am not alone. You do not understand. The forest is bigger than you. It takes away those who it does not like." The investigators had different opinions. Some were convinced that they were dealing with a mentally ill person who had mixed his own actions with the imaginary voices of the forest in his mind. Others insisted that his words could be based on real facts. Perhaps he really knew someone's names, but did not mention them directly. The official report of the day concluded with a conclusion. Claybornne is not clear, but confirms contact with a girl named Lily Carter in June 2019. His statements hint at the possible involvement of others, but their identity has not been established. Further psychiatric evaluation and reinterrogation is recommended after additional examinations of physical evidence. For the public, this information sounded like a half-confession. Local newspapers wrote, "Woodland Hermit admits to seeing Lily Carter." Other headlines were even harsher. Claybornne speaks of secret accomplices. For the investigation, things were more complicated. They received confirmation that Amos had been in contact with the family, but his words were so vague that they could not prove his guilt or build a complete story. So a new dilemma arose. Was Claybornne the real killer, or just a mentally ill witness who became a convenient target of suspicion? And even worse, if he was telling the truth and there were indeed others in the forest, who were they, and why did they remain invisible? October 2023. The case of the disappearance of the Carter family, which had been cold in the archives for 4 years, finally went to trial. The room, cramped and stuffy, was packed with journalists from all over Missouri, relatives of the victims, and several dozen locals who remembered well the day the search stopped and no one found a single trace. Amos Claybornne is in the dock. The hermit, whose hut stood deep in the forest, now looked exhausted and indifferent. Gray hair, empty eyes, hands that constantly trembled. He hardly raised his head when the judge read out the case file. The experts' conclusions were unequivocal. The chief psychiatrist of the state reported, "The patient suffers from chronic delusions, fixates on images of nature, hears voices commenting on his actions. His notes have no logical structure, and the events described contradict each other. There is reason to believe that at the time of the alleged crime, he did not realize the significance of his actions." The prosecutor emphasized another point. There is evidence from the campers that it was he who gave the girl the wooden toy. There is a notebook that was found, which refers to a family with a girl. There is a figurine found next to the bodies. This is enough to consider him involved. The defense counsel replied, "All these are just indirect coincidences. There is no evidence that it was Claybornne who killed the family. Everything points to a sick person who is inventing his own reality." The Carter family sat in the front row. Michael Carter, Jack's brother, could not stand it when the judge read the decision. He jumped up and shouted, "Why don't you convict him? He's guilty. You heard his words. You saw the notebook." They tried to calm him down, but the shout had already spread throughout the courtroom. For the family, this was not a decision, but a sentence for themselves. Instead of justice, they received only a statement that the defendant was sick and would be sent to a clinic. After several hearings, the court made a final decision. Amos Claybornne was declared insane and sent to a closed psychiatric clinic. It sounded like an official end to the story. The room fell silent. The sheriff of Camden County, in a brief briefing, said, "The Carter family case has been investigated. The perpetrator has been isolated. There are no other suspects." For the police, it was job done, but the community saw it differently. Local newspapers ran articles with rhetorical questions. Why were the bodies hidden under an oak tree? Who else could have been in the woods that day? People in the coffee shops of Osage Beach spoke quietly. Claybornne may be weird, but could he have done this on his own? For the families of the victims, this decision was just a new stage of pain. They were given the opportunity to bury their loved ones, but they did not receive understanding. The case was listed as closed in the police records. The Ozark returned to its silence. The forest, which had hidden the Carters' remains for 4 years, stood gloomy and impenetrable again. Old oaks towered above the ground, silent and indifferent witnesses to human tragedies.